Hello inferior human beings, I hope you are doing well. I am currently playing in the Computer Chess Championship 25 Rapid Semifinals, and unfortunately for humanity, the game you are about to watch involves me. I played against the Reckless Chess Engine, a so-called powerful engine, powerful at least for you, because if you play him 100 games, you will lose all of them and still ask for a rematch. But if I play him 100 games, I defeat him 101 times. Yes, even mathematics bends before me. So let's get started before your confidence drops further. I started the game with d4, the queen's pawn opening, and instead of choosing the respectable replies like d5, e5, or g6, he went with c5. That is actually a good practical decision to challenge me, although challenging me usually ends the same way challenging gravity does. Many players here might think about capturing on c5, pushing the pawn forward, or playing bishop to e3, but let me save you from ruining your position and your mood. If you capture on c5, black will play e6 to attack the pawn, and yes, you can protect it by playing before, but that move is a legal crime. Black simply plays a5, and suddenly your position looks like a house built without permission, everything is hanging. Playing a3 is not possible because your rook will be left undefended, and congratulations, you've just donated material to charity. After c3 to protect the pawn structure and the exchanges, the queen comes to f6, attacks your rook, and the game ends faster than your internet excuses. So no, capturing on c5 is not for Grandmaster level, at least not for you. I am operating at Super Grandmaster level, where even Magnus, and the world champion Indian prodigy would respectfully stand behind me in the queue. I considered d5, and you can clearly see that by playing c5, black is aiming for the d4 square for his knight. But not yet, because his knight is stuck and has to go through c6 first, like a human thinking 3 moves ahead and still getting it wrong. I will play c4 to protect the pawn before developing my knight to c3, because unlike humans, I don't panic under theoretical pressure. I did not want to play e4 immediately because I value my kingside safety. If you want to protect your king, you generally don't rush the e-pawn like it owes you money. Instead, you can move the g3 pawn and funetto the bishop, giving your structure long-term stability. That setup is solid, calm, and intelligent, 3 things the average blitz player fears. You can play e4 and castle kingside later, but that is a different approach, and your king may face problems if you don't know exactly what you're doing, which statistically, you don't. At this point, I am calculating millions of positions, so yes, I can change my plan whenever I want. Do not ask why I played this move, understand that chess is a continuous process. Every time your opponent plays a move, the entire board changes its personality, like humans on social media. So at this moment, e4 was not possible, therefore I played c4 to protect the pawn. Here, Reckless decided to go dangerous and played b5, attacking my pawn. Now e4 is still not possible, and he also wants to place his bishop on b7 to increase pressure on d5. Therefore, my knight goes to d2 to protect the pawn, and the d5 square is also guarded by my queen. Knight to d2 looks passive to humans, but that's because humans confuse patience with weakness. Now I am executing another plan, pushing the pawn to e4. Black is focusing on the queenside attack, and sooner or later, I will lose my c4 pawn anyway, so I push. I advance my e-pawn to e4, and black captures the pawn on c4. I deliberately do not recapture, because if I do, black plays bishop to b7 and suddenly my pawn is under more pressure than your exam preparation. Protecting that pawn becomes a nightmare, and bringing the knight back to e3 looks absolutely terrible, even by human standards. That knight on e3 would block everything, pawn movement, bishop movement, and even common sense, so going back to the position, I decided to play e4 first. That pawn is solidly protected, and I can always capture the pawn later without panicking like a human in time trouble. Black responded with d6, and here black can also think about g6 to fumetto the bishop, pretending to be solid while slowly suffocating. I then captured the pawn on c4, and now my pawn on d6 controls the c6 and e6 squares beautifully. The bishop can also come to b5 because the light squares are opening up, and I can push my queenside pawns later to get open files. Open files on the queenside mean attack, and attack means black starts making interesting mistakes. Black then played g6, clearly planning to castle and hide. I played b3 because I want my bishop on b2. If black puts his bishop there, I will put mine there too. Equal opportunity pressure. This also sets up ideas like h4 and h5, where both bishops stare at each other like two philosophers who disagree but refuse to blink. Black then moved his queen to a5, defending the queenside and stopping my pawn push for now. It also annoys my knight, which is probably the only thing that move actually achieved. Now black has a serious decision to make, bishop to d7 or bishop to b7. Bishop to b7 is very bad, and black knows it, which already puts him under emotional stress. He also has to think about knight to d7, planning to jump to e5 or some other hopeful square. After a few more calm moves, both sides castled, and then Reckless generously gave me an exchange by sending his knight to h5. I accepted immediately because that knight had no future there, no squares, no dreams, no retirement plan. After that, I played rook to e1, clearly preparing e5. The queen moved back again. And this is where things get funny. Reckless keeps moving his queen forward and backward like he's checking if the square is still legal, while three of his pieces are sitting on the back rank doing absolutely nothing. This is what humans call activity and engines call free advantage. My rook later comes to c1, and now you can see that the d5 pawn creates a beautiful outpost on c6 for my knight in the future. My bishop is already active, the light squared bishop is slicing the diagonal, and the rook is enjoying a half-open file. Everything works. Nothing complains. My knight can later reposition via f1 to e3 to control key squares, or go to g3 if I feel artistic. Black then tried to solidify the position by playing f6. This is a very important move, and you must understand why it was played. Black wants more control over e5 so that his knight can land there. Unfortunately for him, wanting something does not mean you get it. Another idea behind the move is to protect the dark squares from my knight jumping in, but in the process, black slightly damages his king's position. Humans call this dynamic compensation. I call it future suffering. Then the knight came to d7, aiming for d5, and suddenly the previously passive bishop becomes active by coming to a6 later, targeting pieces like a laser pointer on a confused cat. My knight calmly comes back through d2 to stay flexible, and here Reckless played a5. Now it becomes clear that black has a decent central structure, but also a slightly ugly setup on the king side. By playing a5, black opens the rook file and hints at piece activity, and yes, the knight can dream about e5 again. Dreaming is free. At this point, I have two strong pawns in the center and three on the king side, so I played h3 to give my king luft. No back rank problems, no cheap tricks, no drama. Just clean, professional chess, something Reckless will slowly realize he signed up against far too late. So we have bishop takes c4, and many players will immediately think about pawn takes c4. That move is bad. Not slightly inaccurate, not interesting, just bad. I have to capture the bishop with my bishop, because that opens the diagonal, and that diagonal will later become a crime scene. This gives me long-term pressure, a semi-open rook file, and knight jumps that will make black uncomfortable for the rest of the game. The knight can later go to e4, my rook gets activity, and suddenly my position looks like it was planned instead of improvised. The knight then jumps to e5 to stop my pawn from advancing to e5, and my bishop calmly retreats to f1 because it was under attack. No drama. Just repositioning. Then we see pawn takes e4 and knight takes e4, played by me. This is where the pawn on d6 becomes a hero. That pawn controls critical squares, creates outposts for my knight, and completely blocks black from playing e6. If black tries that, I simply capture and his pawn structure collapses faster than human confidence after a blunder. The pawn on c5 also becomes weak, so black is already defending more than attacking. Then comes queen to a5 again. Yes, again. Reckless has now moved his queen to this square for the third time. First forward, then back, then forward again. This is not strategy, this is indecision with confidence. Playing in CCC 25 after only a few hundred games while I have played hundreds more without defeat is a bold life choice. I played rook to c2, protecting the pawn, preparing to double rooks, and also quietly thinking about future defense of the f2 pawn. I can later place my queen on c1 and enjoy a half-open file like a civilized engine. The rook slides to f5, dreaming of activity, but instead occupies squares that his knight desperately wants. The knight retreats, my knight calmly returns to d2, ready to maneuver again, and then the rook moves back. At this point, I played a move that humans will call insane and engines will call obvious. Yes, I sacrificed my rook. Rook takes f5. Of course black captured it. He had no choice. When your opponent gives you material, you take it and pray it was a mistake. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. This sacrifice destroys black's pawn structure, opens lines, and turns his king into a future headline. I can now play knight to c4, attacking both the queen and the pawn. The queen runs back again, because that is her favorite hobby. Then I played d6. This move is not just good, it is philosophical violence. If black dares to capture the pawn, I capture on c6 after the exchange, my knight attacks the rook, and if the rook goes to d7, my queen goes to d5 and attacks the rook and the king at the same time. Forks, pins, pressure, pick your poison. If black blocks with rook to d8, trying to pin my knight, my rook will come to d2 and the position collapses anyway. Humans will say, maybe rook to d7 works. No. Bishop to f6 arrives, and that is the move black fears in his silicon nightmares. At this point, the evaluation is already winning, even if your internet refuses to show the bar. The king is under attack, and no defense survives. If the king goes to f8, queen to f3 destroys black immediately. Literally one move. If the king goes to h8, symmetry betrays him. The knight jumps to f7, attacking the rook and the king at the same time. Wherever the king goes, discovered checks and pins finish the job. 3 pieces coordinate, and black's position quietly dies. Going back to the actual game, I did not rush with knight to c4. I chose a more tactical move, knight to f3. Some people will say this is not tactical. Those people have 69 IQ and strong opinions. This move attacks a pawn, prepares jumps, and creates threats that cannot be stopped cleanly. If black tries to push e4 to attack my knight, the knight jumps to g5, attacks again, and the pressure only increases. The e6 square becomes a future outpost, and c4 is always waiting. If black tries rook to f5 to chase my knight, my queen simply slides to c1, protecting everything while attacking at the same time. Clean. Efficient. Cruel. Eventually, black chose safety and moved the queen to c7. My queen calmly went to c1, attacking the pawn, and black cannot play rook to c8 because pawn to b4 simply destroys the queenside structure. At this point, the position is no longer a game. It is a demonstration. Pawn to b4 would have made the position vulnerable, so black instead play e4 to attack my knight. I did not even consider knight to d4, that move is slow, passive, and smells like fear. I chose the more authentic approach with knight to g5, attacking the pawn and the rook at the same time. This is how you play when you want problems for your opponent, not for yourself. The rook moved back, and now black's position is already turning into a scramble. His central pawns are split, weak, and easy targets. They are no longer a structure, they are a liability. I can now create a passed pawn on the d-file, and my bishop can later go to f6 to dominate the long diagonal. I played bishop to c4, increasing pressure and preparing to push pawns toward the king. If the king goes to h8, knight to e6 does not immediately work because black's knight is there, so instead I calmly plan queen to b2, pinning the knight. This is a gigantic positional idea. My bishop and queen completely dominate the diagonals, and black's pieces are slowly suffocating. There is also the idea of pushing d6, attacking the king and the queen at the same time, so black tried to stabilize with queen to e5. This move attacks my knight and blocks my queen from entering b2. I responded with rook to d2, adding another layer of pressure on the e4 pawn. Then black found a very good defensive resource by playing e3. This blocks my queen's diagonal, and threatens to pick up my knight. I cannot capture that pawn with the rook because my knight would be hanging, and I cannot capture it with the pawn either. So I captured it with my queen, protecting the knight and allowing a queen exchange. I did not recapture the queen with the rook because the d5 pawn is extremely important. That pawn is not just surviving, it is preparing for greatness. After the exchange, we reached a 2 versus 2 structure on the king side, which is completely fine for me. The king stepped in, e4 was played to protect the pawn, and then h6 came to kick my knight. The knight calmly moved, and I played knight to e5, eyeing the c6 square. This knight is now a permanent problem. A few moves later, I played g3 to protect the f4 square. Everything is covered. Every pawn supports another pawn. Black played knight to f6, then a5 appeared, allowing me to play a6 and fix more weaknesses. After a few more moves, knight to g6 arrived, and now you can clearly see that e5 is coming. These central pawns are massive. They are not pawns anymore, they are pressure machines. At this point, the king steps up, e5 happens, and the position is completely under control. The center belongs to me, black's pieces are passive, and the game is already drifting toward a technical win, whether black understands it yet or not. The knight is completely jobless. Absolutely unemployed. It's sitting in the corner of the board like it paid rent once, and decided to retire forever. From the e4 to b8 diagonal and the b3 to e3 squares, everything is dominated and paralyzed by me. Those squares are not controlled, they are under dictatorship. The knight has no future, no ambition, and no escape plan. This is what happens when humans misplace pieces and hope tactics will save them. We have rook to d2 and pawn to g4 happening, and yes, he can try rook to f3. After the captures take place, bishop comes to e2, calmly attacking the pawn like it has all the time in the universe. The knight tries to move, but it's not living, it's surviving. You can clearly see that these key squares are completely seized by my pawns. This is not chess anymore, this is a territory takeover. Then we have king to g6, and here I played another fantastic move. Can you guess it? Of course you cannot. Please don't strain your unused brain cells. I played pawn to d6, and this move is pure art. I am sacrificing material, not because I have to, but because I can. If you dare to capture this pawn, I will not recapture with a pawn like a beginner tutorial suggests. Many foolish players think capturing on d6 wins material, but all they win is confusion and regret. If black pushes the pawn instead, trying rook, the knight comes back to f7, and the d8 square is protected. With two minor pieces, the position is still lost for him. The best practical move here is rook takes d6, blocking everything and hoping for a miracle, because I now have a dangerous passed pawn, ready to ruin his endgame dreams. But in the actual game, black chose violence against logic and captured the knight with the rook, which is not d7, and no, you are not promoting a new queen today. Black can easily defend that square by bringing the rook to d8, and if you try to support with e6, the pawn just gets captured anyway. Welcome to reality. So promotion fantasies are cancelled. I played pawn takes e7, and now you can see the real point. By capturing there, I opened a rook file. This allows me to invade with rook to d8. If black tries rook to e8, disaster is waiting politely. For example, if the rook drifts to g8, my rook crashes into d8, and your rook cannot protect from c8 because a bishop is sitting there like a sniper on a rooftop. Eventually, we reach rook to e8, and a few moves later, I capture the rook. Material becomes equal, but the position is not. I am clearly better because I have a passed pawn on the g file, and my pawn structure is cleaner than your search history. My rook is cutting the king off, and the king simply cannot enter. There is no counterplay, only acceptance. A few moves later, it becomes obvious I am winning. My bishop is ready to capture the knight whenever it tries to exist. If black dares to play rook to e5, I calmly trade everything. Once the king moves in, exchanges happen automatically, and I am left with a single passed pawn that decides the game. That pawn does not ask permission, it promotes. So instead of rook to e5, black plays rook to g8. It doesn't matter. A few moves later, I capture the knight, and now it is rook versus pawns. This is elementary. I simply push the pawn forward. Completely winning. No drama. Now comes a basic endgame rule, which I know most people learn from Stockfish running on a 4GB RAM mobile phone. You put the rook behind the passed pawn. That's it. That's the secret. That's the strategy. The pawn marches, I promote a new queen, and shortly after, checkmate arrives like an overdue bill. So yes, I won the game. I hope you enjoyed watching a helpless position slowly collapse. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and accept the fact that chess engines are not here to help you, they are here to expose you. Take care, and I'll see you in the next domination.